is probably going to age terribly, but join my giveaway every Saturday at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time for your chance to win a $10 PSN code. I'll see you there. Let's get on with the show. Let's address the elephant in the room here and discuss the Xbox Series S versus the PlayStation 5. I know the numbers are out there. This is and by no means damage control. We're just going to handle the facts as to what it is. And quite frankly, both of these consoles are functioning completely different. They are using the same architecture, but they're going about it in a totally different way. One is actually handling things with brute force, which is the Xbox Series X. It handles things in a very traditional way, um, where you will have certain, bottlenecks that is overcome by either memory bandwidth increases or just overall frequency clock speed increases. The other one, which is the PlayStation 5, actually handles things with better management. I'll go into that in just a second, but I figure I'll address it now. Um, Honestly, Sony has placed a lot of different, and this is not secret sauce. I guess you can call it whatever you want to call it. I mean, you can look at the conference on your own and try to decipher what exactly this smart motherfucker is saying. What I could gather about the PlayStation 5 is that he made sure that there are certain um, chip logic that handles inefficiencies and handles things where it is basically delegating information where things won't stall out or is waiting for something. So it's this little chip that they have in there, whether it's a chip or a part of a chip, that if something is starting to bottleneck, it'll work on something else in its place to try to be as efficient as possible. And we're going to get into that for sure, for sure, for sure. Our next basic topic, just to kind of get into that, will be, what are the differences? Why the differences? Why did Sony make these particular decisions? We're going to get into it now. Let's go. So you may want to know or wonder why the fuck would Sony actually not reduce, but show this video right after, you know, Microsoft basically commissioned Digital Foundry to show off these specs, these higher specs, no less, um, of the Xbox Series X. Like, what is Sony doing exactly? Well, one of the things I want to actually tackle with this mentality that Sony has is basically they're tackling things with smarter development, really. It looks like they are definitely targeting the 399 mark. Um, they want to, and he basically said this as well. I believe the lead or the president of the PlayStation basically said that he wanted to try to get as many PS5s in the home, and $500 isn't going to cut it. It is not going to do it. Um, that's what they're tackling. You know what I mean? Um, so if they have a price point, you have to be a pretty smart person to understand what you need to do to get the most bang for your buck. Not only that, but because it's less powerful on paper, they need a developer to maximize what they do have. So a simpler chip simply means that it's easier to understand and to utilize, really. You know what I'm saying? With it actually being simpler, you have to also take into account that it's probably, because they don't have all these moving parts, going to come out a little earlier. So that's another little, marketing decision that they're doing. They most likely want it to be cheaper, and they also want it to come out earlier, to totally beat out the competition in that particular regard. And then when it is actually out in the wild, the developers won't really have any type of issue learning how it works. You know what I'm saying? They don't have to, figure out with brute force why is it being bottlenecked and things of that nature. You know what I'm saying? Um, Sony also looked at all of the specs at that given time for this holiday season and utilized what was needed. Why go completely ham on something that you don't need right now? Because they're definitely coming out with a PlayStation Pro. There was talks about the PlayStation 5 Pro is inevitable, and they definitely used the PlayStation 4 Pro as some sort of test or rubric. That's something that you can find out if you do a quick Google search. They're going to have a PlayStation 5 Pro a couple years down the line. So why go balls out when you know you're going to do something like that anyway? That's what they're doing. That's the roadmap that they're going to do. That's the PlayStation 4 Pro was very successful, you know, and they basically tackled all of this shit with ingenuity, to get the most bang for their buck with the power. I mean, they are a hardware company after all. You know what I'm saying? So I would imagine they'll know exactly what they're doing. Um, so trust the process. Trust the process. This part is going to be the longest because it's a lot to really go over. So I'll just really get on with it here. So here's the thing. This is the CPU and the GPU. This is going to get a little bit technical. Um, Again, I'm not like an expert. I don't want you to think that I think that I'm an expert, but based off of what I've seen from this conference, this is what I understand. So Sony, and this is what I meant earlier in the video, why they were doing. It's different. It's a different situation. As you know, there is a variable clock rate. And that simply means that they're not, I'm sure there was a whole debacle. I'm sure you realize that there was a whole debacle about, being wasteful with power and shit like that. People were, it was an outcry. Oh, when the councils and, rest mode is using so much power. So that's one of the reasons why they chose the variable clock speed for when it's needed. You don't want it to use 10, 10 teraflops for a browser. You know what I'm saying? Or if you are in a very quiet place within a game, you don't want it to use 10 teraflops, you know what I mean, wasting energy. So this is very interesting how they came about it, you know what I'm saying? Um, so God of War was very successful. So I'm gonna use that as an example in terms of the processing power in regard to that. Usually when shit gets hot and heavy with God of War, you're swinging your weapons around or axe, blades of chaos. You know what I mean? You should have been bought that game. Spoiler alert. And sparks are going all over the place. And what usually happens in that particular regard is it starts to slow down. Um, it starts to be a little bit more hot and heavy. So there is a typical limit, and there is like at its total max. So just by you swinging your weapon and all these particles are going all over the place and they need it for physics, stuff like that, that's when the processor will really kick in and go ham. You know what I'm saying? um, they only use it for really the busiest scenes. Now in terms of the GPU, it has less compute units than the Series X, and their philosophy was basically it'll be easier to basically manage less people that are more efficient, you know what I'm saying, than more people that are inefficient. That's basically what's going on here. And in terms of my example that I said before with the clock speed and whatnot, right? I don't know if you ever bought aftermarket speakers. You pick them up and they'll say, 270 watts of max power and then RMS is 50. You know what I'm saying? Now the speakers are pretty loud, especially when you run an amplifier through them, but it only kicks in with the maximum wattage is if that bass drops, but it can't sustain that or it damages itself. You know what I'm saying? So, with the max wattage, it can definitely pump out that large bass. You need a lot of, energy to create bass. But I think that's what I suspect that they're doing with with this particular CPU and GPU. Real world figures, they were stating as well that when it does downclock for energy reasons or whatever the case is, it's not really about thermals according to Mark Cerny. It's about how much energy is needed, and that's what the key thing is when I looked into it. But he said a few percentage, I mean, you know what I'm saying, would really do, you know what I'm saying, in terms of heat, consumption or just energy consumption. Most likely it's going to be a few percentages. So it's running at max 10.3. You'd probably be looking at 10.1 or 10 teraflops a second. You know what I'm saying? There's no need to beat the Series X in clock speed because you have these logic, the chip logic that delegates everything, that handles information. They even have this compression system. They use Kraken, which is fairly new. It is really good at compressing information, and they have hardware that will allow for data compression. So there's no real need, to try to fight them in brute force when you are more efficient than they are. You know what I'm saying? It was a very, very smart. When we see it in real world performance, you'll see that it's a very smart design, like super smart. Um, and we're going to actually go to memory, and what that simply means there. When it comes to the memory, I keep mentioning about the chip logic. Their input output chip is stupid fast. And I need to take a deeper dive in this myself. I want to know myself what's going on with this particular chip. But from what I understand, this current generation, to combat the slower hard drive read and writes, they had to duplicate information on the hard drive, and that seeking takes up processing power just to try to look for certain things within the millions and millions and billions of fucking data, megabytes of data and shit like that. They have to go through gigabytes just to find what it needs. There's also compression tools, which the system accelerates. So I was saying that about Kraken. It accelerates compression, and it does the compression. So you don't need to set aside a CPU core just to have this done. You don't need to take away your own resources for your game to compress data. I mean, this is some really, really really cool things. It's a very interesting design using existing pieces of hardware. Very interesting. Um, Sony really went balls out with trying to get rid of inefficiencies, is what they were trying to do. So when you look at the numbers, they don't tell the whole story because there's a lot of inefficiencies with just our systems now. And again, Sony is a hardware company. They actually asked all the developers during the time of the PS4 what is going wrong with development. And then once they gathered up all this information, they created this PS5. That's what they ended up doing. They went in and looked at where the inefficiencies were and nipped all of those in the bud. I mean, really, really intelligent design. There's a lot of bottlenecks that I can see with the Series X that will slow it down and basically, I wouldn't say erase any kind of advantages, but diminish it or greatly diminish any type of advantages it has. So it definitely is not the full story here. And the last bit, no, not the last bit. We still got to talk about the SSD and then the ray tracing, which we're going to. But we're going to move over to the SSD and what that means here. Now, the SSD has a lot of little, little, little nice little nuggets of helpings here. For starters, it's definitely going to be faster. It's actually about 2 times faster um, than the Series X when it comes to, kind of reading and writing and things of that nature. But it also has logic as well. It uses the I/O processor to delegate the information, which is it accelerates it essentially. This will allow, instead of, okay, so what Mark Cerny said in his video, in his presentation, is that because you have to duplicate a lot of the information and that takes time, you have to use precious system memory to have most of your level in it. You know what I'm saying? And then whatever that could afford to take time, you will go to the hard drive and pull it from there. Because the SSD is so damn fast, you don't need to do that at all. You can literally pull it from the SSD. It's that damn fast. A whole level could be stored in the SSD, and then you could just store the micro environment details in the system memory, which will give you more immediate details, and you can kind of swap that out as well. Um, Another thing too, with when it comes to game design, um, they have to basically design their game off of the limitations of memory. Memory was a huge issue and a huge limitation in basically all generations, and I suspect even this one, whether it be cost or whatever the case is, but it's greatly mitigated because of what they've done. You have things like corridors where you walk down a corridor, they force you to walk, um, and it's because it's trying to load something in the background and they don't want it to just have a blatant loading screen. Or you go to a door and it has this crazy animation for unlocking and things of that nature. Or like in Horizon Zero Dawn, you have that stupid elevator. You know what I'm saying? Shit like that. Um, with this streaming, it's so fast that it can update the environment or pull information, dump and pull information from the SSD as you're turning your character from from the hard drive. The hard drive. That is fucking ridiculous. Not only that, because you don't have to duplicate information, your patches or the games themselves no longer have to be um, double the size and things of that nature because you don't have to duplicate your information to try to mask the loading. I mean, really cool shit. I mean, I'm pretty ecstatic about it. I really am. Um, Another thing too is that they allow you to purchase your own SSD. Now there are requirements. Some SSDs are all SSDs are not treated equally. Some of them have a faster read write, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be some sort of certification. And along with that, because Sony is ahead of the curve, you're not going to find um, that particular SSD for at least a year. But it doesn't matter because you still would be able to use external hard drives for your old games and whatnot for backwards compatibility. You know what I'm saying? Pretty cool shit. Pretty cool shit. I'm digging it. I'm digging it. So let's go to the last bit, which is the ray tracing. This is a short one regarding the ray tracing because this is the most that we do not know too much about. But he basically gave a picture of sorts, and the more complicated it got, the more red the line got. Okay. He mentions that ray tracing can do anything from actually tracing um, light rays to sound waves, and he specified that when it comes to sound waves, the cool stuff that you can do with sound bounces and things of that nature will be like something in the order of 1 million bounces to create like the reverbs and stuff like that. But you can actually duplicate. They did this with Shadowfall, by the way, too. You can actually duplicate or use that same information for the light bounces. Um, and then it goes into what you call like global illumination, and the global illumination could take 100 million bounces, lines, traces that's bouncing around, and that was not green. It was a little bit, it wasn't yellow, but it was like a greenish yellow, letting you know that most likely you probably get some kind of choking when it comes to that. And reflections are the most intensive. We're talking about billions of lights that bounces. Now, he also stated that a ray tracing is memory intensive. You know what I'm saying? And because it needs to calculate all of the coordinates for where it bounces, and you can kind of cheat. And usually they'll use like a voxel grid based system. Think of it like a invisible Rubik's cube. So the smaller these little cubes are, the more intensive and more memory intensive it'll be, because that means more bounces. But if you have larger cubes or areas where you can resolve it, you can kind of cheat the effect. I guess you could say that. But yeah, based off of reflections, because each bounce is a piece of a pixel. Um, reflections are super difficult, just to let you know. But going back to my example, if you have like this grid that is a larger grid, right? This larger grid, it will be inaccurate, but it will still fit the bill. Now he claims that he saw up and running at some modest results currently with reflections. So maybe they have um, delegation system or proprietary system where it'll be less accurate until you get to that little reflection puddle or whatever the case is. Who knows? We don't quite know, but global illumination is a must. You gotta understand, global illumination is very important for artists because usually every piece of an environment, the characters, the actual environment, and then the objects within the environment usually have different lighting models, just like motion blur and things of that nature. So if you have global illumination, you can create like a unified method, and that's one less thing that artists and programmers have to worry about if the hardware basically does it. And I hope you liked the video. You know what I'm saying? I tried to make it as simple as possible. I tried to understand what this smart motherfucker was saying as much as possible, but I figure I'll try to tackle this. But anyway, let me know in the comments what you liked or disliked about the video, and if you liked it, a sub would be appreciated. Try not to get too caught up in this fanboyism. It really isn't that deep. Just to let you know, it truthfully isn't that deep. The PlayStation 5 is a very, very interesting console because it's not fighting with brute force, it's fighting with efficiency. And with these efficiency boosts, it's probably going to close that particular gap until the PS5 Pro is going on. And I suspect with the PS5 Pro, it's probably just going to do 60 frames per second. That's what it's going to do. And if you have variable frame rates, our variable resolutions is going to tackle that as well. But that's all I got for you tonight. It's early as hell. It's like 6:43 a.m. You guys have a great night.